quick question, are there any Pink Floyd fans in here? Okay, see a few. 30 years ago this summer, Pink Floyd played its last show ever in North America, and I was at that show in the audience. It was at Giant Stadium in New Jersey, different Giant Stadium than there is there now. Just before the music began, Dave Gilmour, Pink Floyd's lead singer and guitarist extraordinaire, walked up to the microphone and he paused. It was for several seconds, and it seemed like he was taking the measure of the crowd. Looking back now, 30 years later, I believe he sensed that the crowd needed to hear something that would make us think and feel. So he smiled a little. He was not a big smiler, but he smiled a little and he said, "Right then, let's get on with it." Simple words, entirely appropriate for that moment. So in that spirit, and in the spirit of today's other presentations, for the next hour or so, you'll hear 3 case studies that I believe will make you think and feel. Bill DeLuise will talk to us about work being done day to day within the Wiley organization to support in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Natasha MacDonald will describe how Canadian science publishing is removing barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the research publishing process. And Andrew Bostjancic of Taylor & Francis will present on the SDG Publishers Compact Fellows. Andrew has several calls to action toward the end of his presentation in the form of QR codes, which we'll leave on screen at the end of this segment so you can approach them and capture them. So please welcome our first speaker, Bill DeLuise.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Before I start my talk, can I just say thank you so much to the organizers for putting today together. I think this is my favorite topic. Societal impact of the work that we do as scientific and scholarly publishers in the scientific and scholarly publishing community is my absolute favorite topic. It's what's kept me in the industry for the past 24 years, and I'm just really grateful that there's a group of people who cared about this enough to put a whole day together on it. So thanks very much to the organizing committee. I'm Bill DeLuise. I've been with Wiley, or a company that Wiley acquired, Blackwell Publishing, my whole adult life. I started with the organization just a little bit before my 18th birthday as what was supposed to be a 3-month temp job. It wasn't. I stuck there for the 24 years that followed in roles in editorial, in business development and marketing, in strategy, and most recently I have taken on responsibility for Wiley's Environmental, Social, and Governance program, our ESG program. This is a bit of a sprint. I want to talk about what is really an operating model case. The way that we are integrating sustainable decision-making, sustainable and socially inclusive decision-making into our operations on a daily basis. So it's not about a product, it's not about a service offering, it's about a mindset that we're looking to drive across the organization. And I think there are a couple of principles that we've been bringing to this work. One of them is that small changes can have a huge impact, and small changes are the only types of changes really that have a lasting, sustainable impact. We aren't about grand gestures. We're not about like the big moment. We're about the millions and millions of small decisions that have to be made every day, that have to be made in the industry and in the organization in a way that's more sustainable and socially inclusive. I think something I've been reflecting on all morning, this is really hard work. Sustainable social inclusion, driving equitable access to scientific and scholarly information is incredibly difficult work. I think it is our job, our collective job, to make it look easy, to make it feel easy for people, to make it accessible and relatable, and to make kind of working in a way that drives sustainability and social impact business as usual for them. And that's part of the approach that we're taking. Dr. Ellis, you mentioned at the start that more organizations are adopting SDGs. You'll hear a lot about the UN SDGs from me as part of our approach to align people around a shared strategic ambition. I moved into our ESG program earlier. It's been about 10 months. And one of the things that it was impossible not to notice was how much amazing work was going on across the organization in a way that drove down our environmental impact and in a way that increased our social impact, but not any of it really was as coordinated as it needed to be. So what we needed was an overarching strategic framework. We'll talk a little bit about how we found that in the SDGs. The other things that we're really driving through our operational management is building transparency with a common way of working, making sure that people working in really disparate parts of the organization on sustainable and social impact initiatives are working in a way that is on shared systems, using shared workflows, and can help grow, engage with each other to advance their work. And then the third way that we're driving more operationalized sustainability, as I've taken to calling it, is to invest in our champions, the people who are driving this work forward. So this is the framework that we are kind of adopting as we look to make sustainable decision-making commonplace in the organization. I previewed this. What you're seeing here is a snapshot of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Wiley has made a number of commitments to organizations like the Publishers Compact, the UN Global Compact. Publishing declares a number of commitments to industry, sector, and system-wide initiatives. Any one of them would have served as a decent framework for organizing our thinking around our priorities, our strategic frameworks for sustainable and social inclusive action. The one that we chose, though, was the UN SDGs. It is the framework that, for us, was the most applicable across the range of work that we were doing. It also aligned very much with some work that we did to assess the materiality of environmental and social topics on our business in the long term. You see this a lot in ESG management. There's a process called a materiality assessment where you look at both financial and impact material considerations to your business that fall into the ESG, environmental, social, and governance realm. We ran ours. It was a comprehensive process. Its results almost flawlessly and accidentally aligned with our Sustainable Development Goal commitments. And so that just really reassured for us that using the SDGs as our guiding framework around our action was the right thing to do. We also particularly found that we needed a guiding framework because, like I mentioned, there was a ton of great work happening in the organization, a ton of it. But it was almost entirely being driven by the fact that there was either a person in a leadership role who independently cared about this, or a person in a job who independently cared about this. So you had people like our facilities leaders who were driving down the carbon emissions of our real estate operations because those people felt like that was the right thing to do. And you had people like our sustainable sourcing manager who over years convinced his boss that that was a real job that someone should be doing because he cared about it. And you had all of these individual people who were making significant impacts through their own efforts. What they needed was a common unifying approach. We found that in the SDGs, but it wasn't enough to make the work come together the way we needed it to advance against the targets that we've set for ourselves in terms of our environmental impact and social impact. We have a couple of targets that kind of govern the rest of that we put above the rest of them. Our climate emissions, our carbon emissions reduction target is a big one for us. And our diversity, equity, inclusion targets are another big one for us. And what we were finding was that, like, we were probably going to be fine, but we weren't sure. The path to achieving our publicly stated commitments wasn't as clear as we needed it to be. The way that we began to solve for that was to harmonize the way that people were working across the organization so that there was a consistent set of workflows, there was a shared set of systems, and so that we had the transparency and the visibility and the ability to predict whether or not our efforts were going to be sufficient. And you can imagine that working across a range of functions, facilities, sourcing, publishing, finance, human resources, a bunch of others, The reaction we got was, no, we have a system, thanks. And it took some convincing to get everybody aligned on the same one, but it made a world of difference. The last thing that we really have, so our approach begins with a shared strategic ambition. It includes a consistent set of workflows and systems. The last thing that's been really so important to us is in supporting our champions. This is work, this type of work, work that drives reduced environmental impact, work that drives an improved social impact, is work that our colleagues, and I'm sure many of your colleagues, are desperate to do. This is particularly true of rising generations. Gen Z, 76% of them believe that climate is a top of mind concern. 37-ish% of them believe that climate is the top of mind concern. Inviting them to bring considerations around climate change into their day-to-day work is like knocking on an open door. And when we find champions in the organization, we look for ways to invest in their learning and development, their access to leadership, which is something that people early in their career, when I was that age, I was terrified of having to engage with leadership. It was the absolute last thing I wanted. Those kids today, they love opportunities to engage with leadership on this topic. And so finding ways to invest that are financial and non-financial that allow them to grow into roles has been part of our work. We've had a great amount of success with the UN Global Compact, which is an initiative that we support, that we engage with. And their learning resources, we've sent people to their accelerator programs. It's not a lot of money. And we offer things like everyone in Wiley has access to LinkedIn Learning courses. We curate learning paths around sustainable topics, business and sustainability for all of our employee population. And when I say all of our employee population, I mean all of our employee population. There are people in our warehouse. I mentioned in one of the breaks that I recently did a sustainability tour of our European distribution center. Every team manager on the floor said to me, here's the continuous improvement program that I'm running. Here is like the way that I'm optimizing my work, and here's what that's doing from an environmental impact, every single one of them. And that wasn't because of work that we did, it was because of work that they did and the passion that they bring to their job. And our job is to help connect them with the resources they need to do their job better and to reward that passion in ways that are financial and non-financial. The other thing I'll mention, we think about our team as a series of concentric circles. There are people whose core job relates to sustainability and social impact. At Wiley, there are a few dozen of them. There are people who touch projects related to sustainability and social impact, and then there's everyone else. And when we think about our employee engagement and education program, we think about the tailored needs of those three groups of people. I'm sure at this point I'm out of time, so I'm just going to say as my last point, small changes add up. That's the mindset that we're bringing to this. The other thing that we won't let go of is the notion that this can't be a side project. That sustainability, that diversity, that inclusion, that accessibility, these can't be gigs that people do. They have to be core to the fabric of the organization. They have to be integrated into the decision-making across the organization. They have to because the world's not going to save itself. They also have to because it's kind of a business imperative. Customers demand it. For companies like us, investors demand it. Regulators demand it. Our employees demand it. If you're operating in a way that is not inclusive of sustainable and social impact considerations, I don't believe that you're operating in a way that will sustain for the long term.
Hi. I'm Natasha McDonald. I'm the Director of Peer Review at Canadian Science Publishing. I just want to quickly say that we're based in Ottawa, Canada, and so I'd like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, on whose unceded and unsurrendered territory our office in Ottawa is located. So Canadian Science Publishing, CSP, is a relatively small not-for-profit publisher. And like many of you, we are constantly looking for opportunities to make our academic publishing more inclusive. So like many of you, we've built this right into our organization's strategic plan, and we're committed to doing work that will actively remove barriers to equitable, diverse, inclusive, and accessible research publishing. But of course, we don't want to just say that we're doing this, and we don't want it to be lip service. We want to have a meaningful impact in ways that are beneficial to researchers and communities. And this means, for us, taking the time to consult, to listen, and to learn. Increasingly, we've been receiving submissions featuring Indigenous co-led and co-produced work. And with that, we've also been receiving an increase in inquiries on how to responsibly and respectfully report this research. So a couple of years ago, we received a submission to our multidisciplinary journal Facets titled Awakening the Sleeping Giant, Re-indigenization Principles for Transforming Biodiversity Conservation in Canada and Beyond. And the authors reached out to us with a request that was new to us at the time. They asked that we allow them to list as first author on the paper the name Msitnogama, which roughly translates to all my relations in the Mi'kmaq language. The corresponding author, Karen Beasley, wrote to us and explained their rationale and said that consistent with Indigenous worldviews, all people, language, and knowledge come from the land and are inseparable from the land. In storytelling and story listening, people are just the conduit. We would similarly like to acknowledge and honor the collective source of knowledge. It also helps to break down the hierarchies, dichotomies, and privilege that are encountered in lead and co-author listings. So like I say, this concept was fairly new to us. Like most publishers, we subscribed, and mostly still do, to the ICMJE definition of authorship. However, these criteria are, as you know, heavily weighted to studies that follow the scientific method, which is the predominant approach to scientific research and reporting amongst Western academic institutions, but it's by no means the only method of research and conveying knowledge. So we embarked upon a pretty lengthy period of research and consultation. We found that some communities, such as the Bawaka Collective in Australia, had previously included what they referred to as a more than human group called Bawaka Country as an author in published papers. And so these papers had been published in well-known publishers such as Sage and PLOS. But from what we could tell at the time, there were no established policies amongst publishers about this more than human authorship. So going back to this submission to our journal Facets, the article was accepted for publication, and we agreed to allow for Msitnogama to be listed as the first author. But we decided to take it a step further and to enshrine this in a policy change across our entire suite of journals, so that this wasn't simply a one-off exception that we were granting while otherwise insisting upon Western concepts of authorship and knowledge contribution. We also wanted this to be very clear to authors, editors, reviewers, and internal staff. So we consulted, like I say, broadly with funding agencies, both inside and outside of Canada, with folks from groups such as COPE, Credit, and the ICMJE, other publishers, and of course, Indigenous researchers, communities, experts, about this topic of how to include collective knowledge as an author to be more in line with Indigenous ontologies. And like I say, we decided to go with the phrase more than human because that is what we found in existing published articles. And there was some other, we didn't want to use non-human because of the connotations there. Currently, there is kind of a move to using other than human amongst some Indigenous communities. And of course, we will keep an eye on this and change our nomenclature and our terminology along with those communities. So we found that there did not seem to be existing guidelines or policies on this type of authorship at the time, but those that we consulted with were generally in agreement that it made sense to include these changes. So we settled on 3 new authorship options. One is the more than human authorship. This exists solely in the context of Indigenous research. So it's not something that someone like me, a Western settler, could just opt to put in on a paper that had nothing to do with community engaged research. And the community may wish to include a more than human entity as an author in the byline. So for this type of authorship, the more than human name, such as the Bawaka Country in the example I gave, is listed in the byline. And the contribution of this collective knowledge is to the research project is described within the article itself. Additionally, the corresponding author has to provide evidence that the community in question desires inclusion of this more than human authorship. And so they could, for example, include a copy of a written research agreement, the approved, a letter or email from a governing body or an elder, or even our license to publish forms signed on behalf of the entity. And although different forms of authorship are permitted, every manuscript has to have at least one human person named in the authorship list who will take responsibility for the work. We also have collaborative and collective group authorship. So these are quite similar, with the difference being that in collaborative group authorship, the group names are included in the paper and the metadata. And for collective group authorship, member names are not usually published, but members who do wish to be named can be listed in the acknowledgements. And these groups include committees, associations, patient groups, and more. So collective group authorship, if it sounds familiar to you, it's because it's fairly common in academic publishing, such as in medical journals, and so it made sense for us to introduce this option for community-engaged research. In researching this, we also became aware that many Indigenous groups, universities, and funding agencies, although they had developed guidelines for conducting this kind of research, at the time, there was very little literature on how to report the research. So in Canada, many funding agencies and universities have guidelines specifying steps that researchers should take when conducting community-engaged research. So for example, Canada's Tri-Council, which is the collaboration of funding agencies covering the social sciences and humanities, Canadian Institutes of Health, and National Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. In their policy statement on conducting research involving humans, there is an entire chapter on researching involving First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Canada. But like I say, the researchers didn't feel, and they were coming to us saying they didn't feel they had clear guidelines on reporting this in their published work, and they wanted to be able to do so, to have guidelines on this, to have a framework for this, because they wanted to be responsible and respectful and inclusive. So to our existing guidelines, we added guidelines on reporting of community-engaged research. So our CER author guidelines help provide advice and best practices in reporting for authors in the following areas. These include authorship itself, different parts of a manuscript, including the introduction, methods and materials, discussion and conclusions, as well as ethics, approval, and permissions. And even things like the data availability statement, and we provide guidance on how to include a community involvement statement. So I'm going to end here with a quote from an article by Ward Fear et al. Saying that failing to recognize Indigenous traditional owners because they cannot qualify for academic authorship could be perceived as discriminatory. The general point is clear. One subculture, professional scientists, has created authorship rules that aim to prevent ethical breaches, but their often narrow scope can marginalize important contributors such as citizen scientists and Indigenous organizations. So these, of course, are just small steps towards making research and publishing more inclusive. We continue to challenge our long-held narratives about what knowledge sharing should encompass and how it should be reported. And we encourage you to do this, and we feel that the best way of doing it is by listening and learning. And with that, I will take any questions if we have time for questions.
Hi, everyone. I am the last presentation before lunch, so buckle in. It'll be 2 hours, and we'll get right to lunch. I'm here today on behalf of the SDG Publishers Compact Fellows. And today I want to talk a little bit more about why publishers should be prioritizing SDGs in their research agenda. So I'd like to touch on a few things today. Look at one, who are the SDG Publisher Compact Fellows? What are we doing? What are we working on? And helping all of you maybe develop your own cases, regardless of your organization or your roles, and being able to help push forward some of the SDGs. So my background is actually not publishing. I come from a political background. So I started my career as a staffer on Barack Obama's presidential campaign in 2012 because I wanted to see societal change happen at a big level. And I thought working with a candidate could make that happen. And then I realized I can't put my faith in candidates. I need to put my faith into the work that I really want to see done on a very practical level. So I got my master's right down the street here at GW and went to work at public policy, focusing in on domestic poverty reduction. And at that point, I would go to Capitol Hill every couple days. I would meet with staffers, I would meet with members of Congress, and consistently the questions I received were, this is great information, we love the stories you're telling us. What's the data? What are the facts? How can I take this to my constituents? What information do you have to make this tangible for me? And oftentimes I came with a very good story about folks we were working with in the poverty space, homelessness, criminal justice reform, but I lacked a lot of that tangible data. And so that's why I really wanted to get into the publishing space so that we can share this information with decision makers so that they can have a very big impact and help us achieve some of these bigger societal goals that we're all striving for. And so I joined Taylor and Francis 2 years ago to start working on some of these issues. And one opportunity came up last November, which was to join the HESI SCG Publishers Compact Fellows. And so this group, if you're not familiar, there's 30 of us, and if you squint, we kind of look like the Avengers. We get together every Tuesday to work on these bigger issues. And it's folks from all across the research ecosystem. It's publishers, editors, researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and we really want to help facilitate the journey regardless of where you're at in this process so that you can have a tangible change and being able to bring that to your organization and to yourself personally. So we do work kind of as a think tank and an action group. And so one of the things that Bill brought up in his presentation was saying how people are yearning to be a part of this. They want to see this in their organizations. And so we actually conducted a survey recently of 167 participants to really find out what they are saying about the SDGs. And so we found that 88% think that the SDGs are relevant to scholarly publishing. 86%, they want to see more proactive in shaping a research communication around societal needs. So they want to see us in this space. This is something that folks in our community are yearning for. And a lot of them, more than half are saying, we want our employer to get in the game. We want them to take a bigger step. There's more that we can do. And so we know that that's something that the folks that we work with and the folks around us are wanting to do and be a part of. And so what we do as the publisher Compact Fellows is we provide a series of events and action tips that really help drive to get folks together. So one of the ways that we held a solution summit last year, and it really was a convening virtually of authors, educators, reviewers, and editorial boards. And really we wanted to have what are the emerging trends, bringing the folks together in the room and having this dialogue so that we can see what are the practical implications of research and how can we apply them to achieving some of these SDGs. What is our role and what is our responsibility in this? We've also done writing for non-academic audiences to achieve that progress toward the SDGs. And so we want to have more hands-on, tangible ways to make it relevant for these types of audiences. And so one of the big things that we really work on, and our bread and butter, I would say, is our top action tips. And so it's not just for publishers. We work with all folks across the community, from publishers, researchers, authors, librarians, connecting researchers and practitioners. We have a whole series of top action tips that we're constantly working on, and we're constantly evolving. And so we want to meet with various folks in the research ecosystem with different ideas, different backgrounds. So like I said, we meet every Tuesday. And in that, we usually have a speaker come in that has a unique perspective that they can share for us. And so I have a link here at the bottom, so when these get shared around, you can find some of the top action tips that might be the most relevant for what you're working on or your organization to perhaps consider or adopt. But for this audience, I thought it would be really interesting to talk through the top action tips for publishers, editors, and reviewers. So first thing would be, one, if you haven't already, please make a commitment. Explicitly commit to the SDGs in the journal's vision or purpose statement. There are 17 related themes that are you might be uniquely well suited to serve, so please make it explicit and be direct in being a part of this. really giving directions and being leaders in this space so that prospective authors, that they can clearly indicate any connections between their submission and the SDG related themes of the journal, and making it really relevant for them. And we have a top action tip for doing that as well. Helping them find a connection. So, utilizing reviewer surveys to ask reviewers to assess how authors can be a part of this as well. And making sure that we have connections so that when authors do not explicitly connect their work to the relevant SDGs, we're working with reviewers to request that they do so. We want to make this very relevant. We can't leave research on the table because we haven't tagged it properly. We want to make sure that there is a way to connect this as much as possible. So being explicit in that and being focused on trying to do that. Utilizing keywords is another overarching theme we've heard today, that we're using the appropriate keywords and taxonomies so that we can correctly identify the SDGs that are impacted by the various articles. Continuing on with that, collecting data, analyzing keyword usage to track journal-level contributions to SDG themes, making sure that you're self-assessing your progress and examining the journal contributions to SDG themes, really leveraging your organization's expertise to host special issues and making it really relevant and bringing folks together that would collectively want to be a part of this. Making sure that you're getting creative with rewarding contributions. We talked a little bit today about how there's some misaligned incentives, and this is one way that you can maybe build out some more explicit ways to incentivize folks to be a part of SDG-related work. And then looking for impact. So there are some non-traditional metrics to start thinking about maybe incorporating derived from policy and practice and non-academic resources, and trying to get really creative with it as well. So I'm going to do an exercise here very quickly, and I kind of want you all to please indulge me. How do the SDGs relate to your own personal values, experiences, and aspirations? So what happens if we achieve these goals? What does our future world look like? What's at stake if we fail or we go backwards? And then take a moment here and just think, why is it important for our community, the research ecosystem, to engage on the SDGs? Why is this so critical? And so just take a moment. I know a lot of laptops are out, pens. Write down your thoughts on it very quickly. I'll hold the time for a second. I want you to take just a moment to do this, please. I'm converting you all into advocates right now, so thank you. So these are the 17 SDGs, so thank you for actually catching me on that. And they may connect with you in various ways. Your organization may have specialties that you can tap into, but be thinking about what are the things that we need to be focusing on as a community. Now that you have maybe your initial thoughts on this, start thinking about how you can refine your story, how you can make it tangible to decision makers at your organizations to get involved. We've heard a lot of really good practical applications for this. So what are some ways that perhaps you can be a part of this as well? And please look to the SDG Publishers Compact Fellows to help get you more information, give you the tools so that you can move forward with this work. So here's how you can contribute, and it's not monetary. You can sign the SDG Publishers Compact. There's a QR code, and I'm going to leave this slide, but I will come back to it so that you can scan it if your phones don't reach from the back. Take action by using our top action tips. These are very practical, tangible pieces of information. Connect with the fellows. Please be a part of this community. Help us move the needle forward, because there's so much at stake if we don't succeed. And so just so in case if your organization hasn't become a compact signatory, here are the things to know. It's for publishers, publishing associations, other organizations in the industry, and even journals can be signatories. When an organization signs, we ask you to please select 3 SDGs to focus on. No deadline and fee for signing up. It's not legally binding. You don't even need to be fully formed in your sustainability plan to become a signatory, but we want you engaged. We want you to be a part of this as much as possible. And once you sign up, you get access to our newsletter. You're able to display the Compact logo on your site, which is a really nice way to just show that you're a part of this. You can have the option to record a member of the month video for the IPA site and be able to take part in our annual surveys of progress. Thank you all.
Thanks again to our panelists, Bill DeLuise, Natasha McDonald, Andrew Bosjancic,